Good morning and welcome everyone. Just allowing for participants to get in. Want to welcome you again to another series from the National School of Government Master Series, where we discuss topical matters and we're able to engage public servants and the public at large to talk to us as government. I'd like to welcome every one of you to this webinar and hope that you will participate by writing your questions within the chat and be able to talk to us. In a special way, we'd like to welcome in absentia at first, our Minister for Minerals, Resource and Energy, Mr. Gwede Mantashe. He will be joining us in a few minutes. We also have our Deputy Minister for Public Service and Administration, Dr. Chana Pilane Majake. Then we also have our Ambassador to Rome, Ms. Nosipho Ngaba. We also want to welcome our Principal at the NSG, Busani Ngaweni. My name is Pindile Mkwanase. I'll be your Program Director for today. I'm at DDG Learning and Professional Development at the NSG. So as you've seen in the advert for this web masterclass, the topic for today is a conversation with Minister Gwede Mantashe and Minister for Mineral Resource and Energy and Ms. Nosipho Ngaba, Ambassador to Rome, on the just energy transition. Just energy transition is a transition towards a sustainable, low carbon, and equitable energy system, which is better for the people and the planet. South Africa needs to transform from where we are currently at 90% coal-generated electricity to a system that is transparent, equitable, and incorporative for renewable energy and alternative sources with much haste. We need to move from the current monopolized fossil fuel dominated system without room for meaningful engagement to a participatory renewable energy system with inclusive decision-making processes. The just component on this transition requires legislative and policy in place to protect workers in legacy energy systems where jobs are at risk. Adequate resources are required to enable a transformative energy transition and one that is truly benefits the people and protects our environment. We have seen what the president has said that we need to do, what we need to do as the country to be able to change and be able to take care of our climate. In one of his comments, as the president said on the 2nd of November, when he was entering into an international partnership with the other governments, France, Germany, United Kingdom, and the United States, as well as the European Union, he said that the climate challenge is an existential challenge that confronts us all. And South Africa is committed to playing its part in reducing global emission. Hence, you find us now having this discussion, talking to the fact of what is South Africa going to do around this. And as part of that discussion, they were able to mobilize resources that are needed for us to be able to move and be able to implement this. This webinar will reflect on the national development, debunk the myths, and tackle the questions such as, will the just energy transition create ghost towns and increase unemployment? Will the just energy transition create energy insecurity without a sustainable baseload? Is the just energy transition debate captured by vested interest? So we want to welcome you and we want you as participants in this masterclass to also give us feedback. We have on your screen, you will see the Q&A box. We are able to write your questions there and give us your comments or questions that the presenters will then address when we get to the stage of Q&A. We will also ask you, as the presentation carries on, to participate in the Mentimeter, where there are some questions that are posed there. We would like to get your responses. The responses are anonymous, so the link will be shared with you at the right time. At this time, I would like to welcome to the platform Professor Busani Ngcaweni, the principal of the National School of Government, to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Program Director, DDG Mkhwanazi. Welcome to you. Welcome to our Deputy Minister, Deputy Minister Chanapilane Majeke. Welcome to Minister Gwede Mantashe. He is struggling with connecting. He will be connecting somewhere in the Eastern Cape, where there is still no just allocation of signal and data, hence the struggles that he is having, but he will join as soon as he can. Welcome Ambassador Nosipho Ncaba, a fellow of the National School of Government, all the way from Rome, where she is now stationed as South Africa's ambassador to Italy, FAO and other UN systems there, and all of you who are here. I'm not going to read the long profiles of the guests who are here, safe to say that we are happy that our Deputy Minister is here. She's leading a very critical debate around these issues of the just transition. In many instances, these conversations are taking place in the mainstream media and the public discourse, and public servants themselves are not necessarily engaged or immersed in this type of a debate. And we hope that we will continue to have the leadership that the Deputy Minister is assisting with. And we also apologize for the Minister because he's got other responsibilities. And the Ambassador here, she is known to some of you, having been the longest serving DG at the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism at some point. She has led many programs, starting with double SSD some many years ago. Some of you may fully be aware of some of those developments, all the way up to her exiting the public service as a Director General to become an ambassador in Italy. And then Minister Mantashe, most of you are aware that he's responsible for the Department of DMRE, which is a merger between Department of Energy and Mineral Resources. I think I must make this announcement, Chair, before I exit the platform, to allow the conversation to continue, that you are all attending this masterclass, which is part of a longer masterclass series of the National School of Government, which happens almost every month. We bring key topics for public servants and the public in general to dialogue on topical issues like the one we are dealing with today on the just transition. Is part and parcel of enriching our course offering across the 4 faculties of the National School of Government that we have. We are hoping that by public servants engaging in these conversations together with stakeholders from outside, we will build a committed, diligent, ethical, and an innovative public service. You might recall we had another masterclass earlier, which was focusing on the economy post COVID by Professor Tadi Rodrigue, and today we are having this masterclass. We have had a series of others with leading experts, both locally and globally, who are engaging here with all of you. Importantly, I want to say to you all that the National School of Government is launching a new course as of next week, which is a part of our effort to support the just transition process within the public sector. The course is called Our Planet, Our Home, Promoting the Green Economy to Balance Inclusive Growth and Sustainability. So from next week, you will be able to do this executive education course at the NSG. We will give you through the chat platform our email address. Otherwise, you can send elearning@nsg.gov.za. I believe, Chair, that I have earned my upkeep for the month. As a self-funding government department, we have to promote our products so that you can sign up for them and we can meet our obligations. Back to you. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Thank you, Principal. At this time, we're going to ask our Deputy Minister to please speak to us as welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Pindile Mkonazi. My name is Kana Pilane, Dr. Kana Pilane Majake, Deputy Minister for Public Service and Administration. Let me also acknowledge in absentia Minister Honorable Gwede Mantashe. Also acknowledge the presence of the principal who has actually welcomed us to this masterclass webinar series, Busani Ngaweni, and the ambassador to Rome, Nosipo Ngaba, who will actually be a respondent, or maybe she will. The rules have changed since I hear that Minister Gwede Mantashe is not here, but Program Director, let me also acknowledge on the platform, I see it's a large number of people that are on the platform. I have not had the opportunity to really scan the names, but I just wish to acknowledge their presence here, the senior management from government, people from the private sector, to say your presence is welcome. The National School of Government launched the masterclass and webinar series in 2020. The NSG is pleased to host today this masterclass webinar series towards green economy, with the theme that reads as just energy transition. And maybe I could actually put a rider to say towards a coordinated approach that prioritizes the country interests unhindered or not vilified. Several key themes have already in the past been addressed, and many valuable insights have been gained. Masterclasses are able to offer valuable opportunities such as gaining fresh ideas and improvement on performance strategies by making contact with high-profile leaders of industry and professional experts and practitioners. The masterclasses and webinar series initiative is commendable, principle, as it provides space for diverse sector engagement with government on critical matters towards advancement of state capacity. It is hoped that through engagement with DPSA branches on the outcomes of the masterclass and webinar series, public service policy imperatives will improve. This platform also provides space for more equal engagement, with execution of sessions being more driven by participants' interests and not imposed topics by NSG. Unlike formal courses conducted by NSG, masterclass and webinar series do not have prescripts for attendance. They offer just-in-time insights. These platforms have seen a high level of attendance with the Protection of Personal Information Act webinar series that totaled 700 attendees in 2021. This Protection of Personal Information Act webinar platform was delivered in 3-part series in partnership with the Information Regulator of South Africa, Advocate Pensit Fakula, and proved to provide insights and learnings to all sectors, including ordinary South Africans who provide insights and learnings to all sectors, including Facebook, YouTube, as well as formal link for sessions. The NSG has managed to exploit online spaces beyond the formal channels of Zoom and MS Teams by providing access to forum via public channels. The Protection of Personal Information Act session particularly attracted ordinary South Africans who discussed everyday questions which affect the levers of society, such as the use of personal information, interaction with business, information security at institutions, etc., etc. The public nature of these platforms has resulted in an increased awareness in the work of the school, as well as an increased interest in engaging in key themes that affect not only service delivery, but the broader society. The masterclass and webinar series also builds bridges to Chapter 9 institutions. In August 2021, the NSG hosted a webinar with the Auditor General of South Africa. The Auditor General of South Africa is an active strategic partner in enabling public sector accountability and oversight. As such, the Auditor General of South Africa is always open to creating opportunities for robust engagement and sharing audit insights that provide or give further clarification to the audit outcomes. This platform, that is the platform with the Auditor General, provided space for conversations on audit findings and audit outcomes, working towards clean audits, which is what this government is always looking forward to. Ambassador, it is hoped that the masterclasses webinar series platform will gain momentum and continue to grow NSG to provide a conversational space for all sectors of South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a conversation between Minister Honorable Gwede Mantashe and Ambassador Nosipho Ngaba, who will today present this webinar in this masterclass webinar series, Just Energy Transition, and like I put the rider at the beginning, towards a coordinated approach that prioritizes country interests unhindered or not vilified. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that beautiful welcome, Deputy Minister Majeke. We appreciate your support as always as the NSG. At this time, I'm going to ask our Ambassador, Nosipho Ngaba, to take the floor.
Good morning. I hope I'm visible and I'm audible. Thank you. Good morning, Deputy Minister, and good morning to Minister Mantashe in his absence. Hopefully he will join. And as you have already introduced me, I'm supposed to be the respondent, but I'm going to attempt then to initiate the conversation in the absence of the remarks by the Minister. Thank you to the principal of the National School of Government and the senior managers that are in attendance. I'm also not sure who else is online, but if there are also members of the public, I would like to greet you all. I'll start by a disclaimer in light of the fact that I'm no longer fully embedded in the processes that are unfolding in South Africa. So my data may be a little bit not the latest data, but the essence of the message will certainly be aligned, I would like to believe. Just by context, I have a presentation which I would like the colleagues to share. I would begin with I think in the first slide I've already made my greetings, but in the context, I would like to frame the conversation based on science, evidence. I'm quoting the IPCC in the presentation, which is the panel of scientists, and it's a UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that has provided us with data as states of the world. And I'll begin by prefacing my conversation by starting with the bad news. Bad news, even if policies that were to be adopted or are adopted by countries of the world globally were implemented by the end of 2020 in terms of efforts to cut or reduce carbon emissions to the atmosphere. Even if those efforts or policies were implemented, the essence of the IPCC report is that the world would still warm at about 3.2 degrees Celsius, resulting in catastrophic effects. And I would say with the planet being hit by those unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, and widespread water shortages. The good news, if I may, are that we can still do something about it by keeping the temperatures low, at least below 1.5 degrees Celsius, as it is also recommended by the IPCC. And therefore, I'm prefacing this conversation by saying South Africa has a choice. And we have to make those choices, putting South Africa in the context of a 1.5 degree world or warming globally, 3 degrees warming in South Africa and sub-Saharan South Africa. So South Africa is going to warm at least at double the rate of the global average. That is what the science tells us. Secondly, South Africa is amongst the most carbon intensive economies of the world. We are in the top 20 countries of the world, not because of our GDP, but based on the greenhouse gas emissions. And we're the biggest emitter in Africa. That being the context, I also mentioned in this first slide that the physical climate risks will have severe impacts on agriculture, food security in particular, water security, biodiversity, tourism, physical infrastructure, and we refer to built environment and others. But I'm mentioning these as one of those key sectors that are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And lastly, before we move to the next slide, I'm also outlining here that part of the good news is that leadership in South Africa, both in terms of the leadership of the president, has already made public statements to commit government, and cabinet has made decisions to implement actions that would enable a transition towards a low carbon economy. And therefore, highlighting the fact that President Cyril Ramaphosa has set up a presidential climate change commission, which is made up of various commissioners chaired by the president himself and the deputy chair being a leader that is also known, Vali Musa. So the purpose being that it is going to set a vision for the country for a just transition to a low carbon economy and a sustainable society by mid-century. So that is in a nutshell what I thought I should start with. And within the context of our transition to a low carbon economy, we will undoubtedly require partly some realignment of policy, extensively reviewing our legal frameworks, and also to enable technological deployments that will aid our efforts for mitigation and also adaptation to climate change. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that a transition will also need to focus on those social risks, especially what we normally refer to as externalized or not internalized social costs, because those are costs that are quite important for us to consider when we relate to what is going to be required for us to transition. So the costs that are associated are particularly in relation to the loss of employment and livelihoods and implications on our developmental agenda as a country. And my next slides will then demonstrate some of these aspects. Next slide. I wish to trace both in terms of timelines what has been in place, both in terms of policy formulation, in order to make sure that we move from the same premise. And of essence, when we have debates about the transition, we have to bear in mind that we have been at it since 1998 or even before, but certainly in the energy arena, the policy formulation or reformulation began in 1998 with the realization of the importance of diversifying energy sources to secure the future for our country. Therefore, that white paper on the energy policy, including the white paper on renewable energy policy in 2003, began to create a space for renewable energy technologies within the South Africa's energy mix. That, in essence, is what I would like to highlight in that respect. Hence, the IRP as a plan that is adopted at cabinet level. It was the one that was adopted in 2010, began to introduce a renewable energy-based generation, which was not there previously. The IRP update in 2013 began a process of alignment for a genuine low carbon development path that would align with international commitments that have been undertaken by South Africa on climate change response. And the 2019 IRP that was adopted also reflected that transition, or at least the beginning of our alignment in terms of policy formulation across the sectors in that respect. Next slide, thank you. In this, I'm also outlining within the policy framework on energy that our president mid-year last year lifted the threshold for embedded energy generation, which allows companies, especially the intensive energy users, to launch or even invest in own generation project. This announcement began to revolutionize the energy landscape in South Africa, in my view. And again, I'm making these statements, I think, advisedly. Next slide. I now begin to refer to some of the examples that relate to sectors that are outlined to possibly be affected and the opportunities that would also arise in those sectors. South Africa is a world-class automotive sector. As you know, government has been making investment, attracting OEMs in respect of manufacturing for our automotive vehicles, both, as you may know, within Gauteng, KZN, Eastern Cape. We have hubs for vehicle production in our economy, and that has at least began to create a story or reframe a story about our industrialization path as a country. in this sector, it is already indicated that scientifically and even technically in terms of developments worldwide, or at least in Europe, there is already a shift from combustion engines, which is beginning to disrupt the trend for the automotive industry globally. Therefore, we need to find an ability to adapt to that fact. So the new vehicles into the future are expected, or at least forecasted, that we have vehicle sales that would be almost about 40% of the overall average being electric vehicles by 2030, and also projected to be almost 80% by 2040. Again, the question is, South Africa's industry must then begin to appreciate this possibility and this reality. And if we do not transform to advance electric vehicle revolution as a country, we are going to lose our competitive advantage in the export market. And most of our vehicles are exported to the European Union. And that is going to contribute to GDP losses and also some significant job losses for the entire value chain. So this is in essence what the reports that have been put forward indicate. Next slide. In the mining sector, again, this is one sector that's also highlighted as a sector that is going to be impacted with a transition to a low carbon future globally, because South Africa is not an island. Of course, the coal sector contributes significantly to the South African economy, with at least on average 47% of our total coal sales contributing to the electricity sector, 16% of which contributes to our coal to liquids, and as per the business model of Sasol. And overall contribution of the coal sector is projected at 139 billion rands of mining, and which is exported at 49%, yielding a 2.4% of GDP in 2018. And you can see, when you look at the picture, the size of the circle indicates the job contribution in terms of the mineral resources that currently are in South Africa. And these are projected to decline. As you see, there's negative growth on the left side, and then on the right side, there's positive growth. And you can see what the minerals of the future that we will, as a country, be able to strategically position ourselves in for the various export markets. But however, having mentioned that, I think one major worrying factor, I think, both for society and people that are employed in the sector, is that many of the mining towns are highly reliant for employment, especially in the Mpumalanga towns. And the mining sector, as it is, or at least this coal sector, is projected at currently sitting with providing almost 80,000 jobs. So the key question is, how are we going to deal with that challenge, and what are the opportunities that exist for South Africa in terms of positioning in respect of our natural resources, mineral resources. Next slide. The agricultural sector is also another sector that's indicated to be highly vulnerable to impacts of climate change, and with a possibility that we are, or with implications for food security and the broader population, including the farm workers, especially in historical labor-serving regions. We may recall in South Africa that almost 3 years ago, we had prolonged periods of drought in the Western Cape, which had a reported impact of about 40,000 job losses. Again, the key question is how are we going to enable our preparedness for this sector to continue to thrive. Therefore, it is clear that with mitigation measures, which would make the agricultural sector more competitive, both in terms of irrigation system and renewable energy sources, there is at least a potential and a positive story for us as a country in that respect. So the agricultural sector has elements of potential for benefit from the transition than allowing it to be vulnerable over time if we do nothing in essence. So that is the kind of message that I wanted to convey with that slide. Next slide. Again, I have already spoken to the coal sector and its contribution, and the main aspect here is that we need to focus on how social justice is going to be realized in respect of the transition. We must be able to prepare and have our transition plans considering those coal-dependent communities in terms of what are the potential opportunities elsewhere and how do we adapt and prepare them both from a skills point of view, or even in areas where we are going to have ESCOM decommissioning plans. How do we ensure that we repurpose those coal power plants, or even consider the areas where we have mine closures to provide opportunities for mine rehabilitation and also alternative land uses, including deployment of renewables even within those areas and agriculture opportunities. Some of these are also indicating opportunities wherein within the context of various sectors, we can look at other detailed plans for adaptation, because even in some of those areas, we may also still face other challenges, like we have had acid mine drainage in the Witwatersrand area. We have to prevent that from happening and make sure that we realize the social justice for those that are not necessarily directly benefiting through the current mining operations. Next slide. I also thought, because I was dealing with the leadership of the country in this panel, in our conversation, again, as I indicated, the ruling party, which is the ANC, has taken decisions within its policies. In 2007, the ANC Polokwane resolution recognized that climate change is a threat, a new threat on a global scale that is going to require South Africa to take immediate action and set targets for reduction of these greenhouse gases. In 2012, similarly, at the ANC Mangaung conference, a resolution was adopted in respect of driving global efforts to achieve stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. Again, these are aspects of what, even in terms of civil society, we should be taking on as guiding us in terms of really getting our act together in respect of getting dirty in terms of our hands with the implementation of the key actions that will enable a transition. And the next slide focuses on our international work as a country. Again, in this slide, I'm again just tracing back that in 2008, already as South Africa, we had undertaken a scientific study which modeled existing commitments and plans up until 2025 in respect of our sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And that study then gave rise to what we refer to as long-term mitigation scenarios, wherein as a country, again, we were outlining what options do we have for emissions reduction that are available within our means, and also with means of support from international partners. In 2009, COP15, as South Africa, we announced the intention, as again approved by Cabinet, to implement mitigation actions that collectively results in a reduction of emissions, moving from business as usual scenario at the time, resulting in about 34% of our emissions deviating from business as usual in a trajectory between the period of 2020 to 2025, and beyond that, with our emissions peaking, and then they begin to plateau and declining definitely beyond 2030. Those were the projections that we had at the time from the science that was modeled with our partners. In 2011, at COP17 in Devon, which was hosted in South Africa, under South Africa's leadership as the COP president, we again took bold decisions as part of the world, indicating our real commitments as a global citizen to advance global effort to address the global climate change crisis. So the Devon platform set a long-term pathway for the development of a fair and ambitious and legally binding future multilateral and rules-based global system. And it set a frame for the next COP to conclude. And the COP in Paris in COP21 then concluded the deal that was initiated in Devon. Next slide. Again, in terms of the climate change policy development in South Africa, we had our white paper policy approved by Cabinet in 2011 and promulgated by Parliament, setting out a vision for effective climate change response with key elements of long-term mitigation and also enabling a just transition to a climate resilient carbon economy and society. In that same year, the National Development Plan was published, and it set out the 2030 vision for South Africa's energy sector, including proposing that renewable energy and gas should make up 20,000 megawatts of the electricity supply by 2030. And in 2013, the long-term mitigation scenarios were concluded with a potential impact on response actions. By 2014, we then undertook what we referred to as a fact-based process with key stakeholders, particularly business and industry, which is actually supposed to take some of the actions that are outlined in terms of us meeting our mitigation potential as a country. This assessment or this fact-based process assessed the mitigation potential available to South Africa's economy at that time, and it projected that with what we use as what is then the list, some of the list-based options in terms of cost curves. So we were looking at marginal cost curves, indicating which is the pathway that we can achieve with minimum investment, both by the state and even by the private sector. And that work then projected that our national gas emissions were then going to decline by beyond 2030, and we then indicated what that pathway would look like, especially in the context of technologies that were still also in development and not fully in maturity in that respect. So a total projection of about 37% of our emissions in respect of a measure of 39.7 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent could be achieved with a cost saving. So an abatement option for the power sector was dominating the potential for the energy sector, accounting for 79 to 89% of the mitigation potential. So this, in essence, also began to clear on the fact base what are those key sectors and what are the elements that we could move with some rapid actions on. Key among these abatement options was nuclear, onshore wind, solar, photovoltaic, carbon capture and storage, and concentrated solar power. And all of these options were modeled, and we were then going to get into plans to actually look at what also it would mean to invest in some of them. And in the area of nuclear, if I may, we then did not move within the period that was expected. There was no investment in nuclear in 2009 and beyond, and therefore we reached a point where South Africa could no longer afford the new investment in nuclear, and hence there was a consideration to repurpose Quebec and look at what could continue to contribute to the electricity grid. The mitigation potential analysis was aimed at achieving the peak, plateau, and decline range that I already referred to. And companies undertook then the commitment that they would take carbon budgets for each company, supported by pollution prevention plans. And therefore, within the legislation, in the Environmental Affairs Department, that aspect was enabled, and companies in South Africa were already reporting on those carbon budgets, and the reporting system was also used to gather information on the actual emissions of users and the compliance processes that we are committed to in terms of our international obligations. Next slide. And then the other measure being the carbon tax. Again, when we were discussing whether South Africa is ready to implement a carbon tax, we were looking at how do we put a price on carbon? And aspects of it relate to the fact that, yes, there is an economy that must not suffer, but at the same time, there is also the social cost, including the public health investments. And within that, there was then an agreement to then undergo the process, and Treasury led the process of designing a carbon tax for South Africa, and that carbon tax has now become effective since a year ago. Tracking South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions. Again, these slides, you would see the blue block and the red, the green, and the purple on top. This is the inventory that was undertaken during the earlier periods, tracking South Africa's emissions in 2014, and indicating that with excluding the land use sector, our emissions increased by 21% compared to the levels that were in the year 2000, with about 95 metatons of carbon equivalent. That increase is outlined in the slide as coming from partly the waste sector, contributed to that increase, and the energy sector. The sectors that decreased was agriculture and on the industrial processes. The decrease in agriculture is accounted for with the livestock population decline, that took place in that year, in that period. And in terms of the industrial emissions, again, this aligned with the emission reduction and interventions, especially in the side of energy efficiency and the electricity and economic crisis that preceded 2014. So that is in essence how we account for that difference. Tracking the transition to a low carbon South Africa, that's the picture or the kind of a wave on your right-hand side. There we indicate the effect of South Africa's mitigation initiatives in terms of the greenhouse gas inventory. So we are tracking what the demand side management projects of Eskom contribute. The Sasolburg natural gas conversion, Secunda nitrous oxide abatement projects, and so on. That's what that right table reflects. And in essence, the greenhouse gas inventory was looking, having this kind of profile in 2014. I do not have the slide of the later version of the greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. In respect of 2015 COP21, which I indicated was building on the Durban platform, this is where the Paris Agreement was concluded, and South Africa also presented its nationally determined contributions, which was voluntary at the time. And Paris COP21 was a crucial milestone in respect of the discourse in climate change, setting the world on a course to secure the fight against climate change. And this replaced the old Kyoto Protocol. And it reaffirmed the goal of limiting global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. It contained a legally binding framework for reporting, transparency, and the review of the implementation and driving ambition, so that we are guided by science on an ongoing basis as various states. It also established a nationally determined contributions framework, for which South Africa is also submitting NDCs every 5 years. We submitted our nationally determined contributions update at COP26 last year. 2015, South Africa deposited its first nationally determined contributions to the UNFCCC Secretariat, and in 2016, we initiated a process of drafting a climate change legislation. Next slide. Okay, beyond 2016, again, I'm just highlighting the instruments. We have mandatory national greenhouse reporting, and the report of 2017 is available. The RP update, which outlines the electricity plan for the country, and the carbon tax implemented as of the 1st of June 2019, various tax incentives. We had an incentive that was again enabled by the National Treasury for energy efficiency and renewable energy, biofuels production, and research and development innovation. Carbon offset administration system was still under development, and that has also been undertaken in 2020, and the green transport strategy. Low emissions development strategy was also adopted by Cabinet already a year ago. Therefore, this is one of the mitigating instruments that is crucial for energy, industrial sector, including agriculture, forestry, and land use, and the waste sectors. So the various sectors then have a frame or a kind of guiding document that can be utilized to contribute to emissions reduction. Next slide. Awesome. All right. now I then just run through the next slides. I'm going to be quite fast. President appointed the Presidential Climate Change Commission, which is a multi-stakeholder body overseeing and facilitating the just and equitable transition towards a low emissions and climate resilient economy. Cabinet subsequently approved in 2021 the updated NDC for South Africa, which NDC has now revised the range for our emissions reduction, mitigation range of 395 to 510 metatons of carbon for 2025 and another range for 2030, so that we then limit our growth in emissions within the Paris Agreement provisions. South Africa brought forward the year for the emissions due to the decline from 2035 in the initial NDC, which was 2025. So from 2025 to 2025, 35 to 25, sorry. So we have now begun to put forward an NDC that's more ambitious as a country, and that is what was then presented before COP26 in Glasgow. COP26 is that took place last year, operationalized other aspects of Paris Agreement and reached an agreement on a 2-year work program to operationalize the global goal on adaptation. Adaptation is key for South Africa and the African continent for many respects, and we've seen what has happened in Durban in the recent past with flooding, and therefore our preparedness is going to rely on financing and international financial flows, because South Africa was not responsible for those historical emissions. However, we still have to make sure that we are safe for the future. Negotiations on global goal on climate finance for developing countries. There was an agreement in respect of progress to review and monitor the $100 billion commitment per annum, which was not met by the developed countries. It was set for 2021 and now until 2025. A platform was set up to address the just transition and alignment of financial flows and to enable pathways for low greenhouse gas emissions. The climate change bill of South Africa also is, I understand, has been put before Parliament, and it's a bill now that should finalize how we are going to legally be bound as a country and various sectors to achieve the transition to a low carbon future. Next slide, I would like to try and finish. Next slide. I've spoken about the IPCC report. Next slide. I mean, the key message on this slide is that as I have already sketched in terms of the timelines, from 1998, we had plenty of opportunities to be proactive and more competitive. And now we have limited space to delay action. So the next years and the next months or even weeks are about how do we limit the warming and what options the sectors would pursue to halve the emissions to limit global warming. What are the innovative instruments that are available for electrification or improving our energy efficiency? There are alternative fuels like green hydrogen that's under development. How are we going to take those opportunities? And is South Africa ready to be at the forefront of those opportunities to transition? How do we advance green growth with a notion that underscores the fact that because South African society is fully benefiting from fossil fuels, both in terms of jobs and livelihoods, and the green growth and green economy, green jobs have not materialized significantly as yet. And it is important that we give the opportunity to enable that transition. And it's not an either or. It is really an important point where we put programs in place that are going to demonstrate that there are opportunities for real in terms of green growth and green industrialization. Therefore, the urgency that we need to deal with the climate response, it is more to limit the risks for the country and society. We have to take action now to secure our future. Cities are hotspots of impacts and risks, but also they are a crucial part of a solution. We have to narrow our arguments around this. We need to focus on action. Science evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in that concerted global action will miss a brief and a rapidly closing down window to secure a future livelihoods. Next slide. I've indicated already that we have a Presidential Climate Change Commission that is helping the country to set a vision for a just transition, and it has made progress in that respect. And the key aspect is that the composition of the Presidential Commission, with commissioners involving people from outside government, business, labor, civil society, research, and academics, is a huge opportunity for sharing information, science evidence across social partners. And various social partners have already undertaken enormous work, which is also informing some of the proposals that are being articulated in the public discourse. So a consensus building effort is quite important, and the role of the Presidential Commission in this respect is indispensable. We have to enable action to promote sustainable economic change, and change is not easy. We cannot procrastinate. We have to enable and deal with some of the culture shocks, but also at the same time allow the process to move with speed. Next slide. Next slide. So in summary, the just transition is a shift towards a low carbon, climate resilient economic system in the context of environmental sustainability and social justice. It is not an environmental issue. It is about sustainability in the context of all the pillars of sustainability. The main elements that will enable the upholding of justice in the context of the South African Constitution. Remember that the South African Constitution gives effect to a Bill of Rights that allows people to have an environment that is protected and that is not detrimental to the health and well-being. And aspects of non-action are then going to attract costs for the state and liabilities beyond also loss of life. Administrative justice is something that is non-negotiable, procedural, being inclusive in decision-making. Again, there is no one party that is going to deal with climate change and the just transition. We have to enable the discourse of multi-stakeholders in order to then take informed decisions in that respect. Distributive practices of fairness in allocation of resources in society. Again, when we say yes in allocating resources to one area and we say no to the other, we need to then enable discourse that when we are being critiqued in terms of where the resources go, we are able to provide the evidence that we took informed decisions. And restorative justice is also a part of what is enabled in our constitution. So we will have to compensate impacted groups, including in some areas, making decisions proactively about moving people from areas where it is more risky because science says in building in an area that is not, is in a 50-year flood line, 10-year flood line is going to be make those households at risk, and some of the households built in those areas without having information, and some of the decisions that have to be undertaken is to how best do we restore and make sure that we enable society to participate and take informed decisions. Lastly, I think here again, I'm concluding, we have to gear up for the just transition, and that's in summary. The whole story about my presentation now is more a compelling case for establishing the building blocks for a just transition. And we have plans that have already been put in place. We have the international framework. We do have the foundations that are necessary. And now it's time. The Presidential Commission is in place. The South African National NDC has been updated. We have a just transition framework, and now we have to get into implementation. Implementation and understanding what governance arrangements that we can put in place or that are existing that we can capitalize on. We have clusters in government, and because I am a former Director General, I thought I should indicate that government clusters can begin to play a role in terms of the processes that are involved in just transition, particularly in terms of harmonizing priorities, harmonizing policies, and then get to implementation in a manner that is swift and just. Next slide. Again, here, way forward towards the just transition. I'm putting forward some thoughts. Again, here we deal with the fact that a collective vision has been set for South Africa for a just transition. It is no longer a fact whether a transition is going to happen or must happen, or jobs or competitiveness. These are false choices. These must all happen. There must be jobs, but what type of jobs? How do we become competitive in a changing global system, whether it's in the automotive sector, whether it's in the mining sector, whether even in terms of the energy sector. We need to refine our assessment of impacts for vulnerabilities. And this work was undertaken at some point, but it can be refined further from emissions and the physical risk perspective, so that key sectors are able to define pathways for the transition for each case, so that we are not general and all over. It is urgently needed that we finalize the National Employment Vulnerability Assessment and the Jobs Resilience Plans that support that work for each sector that is outlined to be vulnerable. In the slides, I indicated a few sectors. The list can be long. We need to diversify employment opportunities, put in place reskilling programs for the exposed sectors. We need incentives for job transitions and so on. Green growth and green jobs can really be enabled and in various sectors with clear demonstration, because people are not going to believe that you are going to provide job opportunities unless you put in place programs that demonstrate those kinds of responses. And people will then, because human beings, myself, included tend to frame things from their own perspective, and if there is a visible action and programs that people that see themselves as threatened, they can then appreciate that there are other opportunities that are available. And then finally, I have one more slide. The South African transition, that's the next slide please. I'm repeating again here that the climate resilience transition must be located in the context of impacts and the transition in Southern Africa and the continent. Again, we are not an island as South Africa. Our emissions as a country, which are the largest in the continent, will impact the continent. So we need to reposition ourselves even in that context. South Africa must be proactive for the sake of the current and especially future generations. Our average, I'm told our average young people in South Africa, they're about what, 18 years? The question is, if in our population, in 10 years time or 20 years time, when those 18-year-olds get to my age of 56, how will they will they be proud of the decisions that we've made? Will they like what they see as South Africa at that point, and the other children that must still be born to this world? We have to avoid adding a debt burden for future generations. South Africa's fiscal is already constrained, so the choices that we make must also be basically following a least cost energy pathway. Delays in locking the country will be locking the country into an obsolete and unlivable world. Time is of the essence. Every month, every year will count. Every child, whether they were born 10 years ago or within the next 10 years, will be facing a life that is significantly impacted by a changing climate. We must all act now to contribute to the global effort to secure a livable and a sustainable future for South Africa. Every organization, whether in a corner bookshop, local school, a grocery store, a boardroom, can and should be taking action. Finally, clusters and directors general must at least use evidence to develop policies or implementation plans for a just transition. And I'm making this in the context of the fact that in the social cluster, there is specific contribution that that cluster can make, again, to avoid the silos of departments. Similarly, in the economic cluster, international relations and cooperation, a security cluster, justice and security cluster. These would interface well with the work of the PCC on the just transition and the Department of Forestry and Fisheries and Environment. DMRE, my proposal to the minister is that it should establish a branch on green energy development or just transition. Again, there is always an opportunity. The reason why I'm making this proposal, I know that it's beyond my pay grade. In fact, I don't even make decisions of this nature, but just a thought. It's also unfair to expect somebody that has been a coal engineer for years to suddenly change. So it is important that we get the right people, at least in parallel with the work that is still undertaken on coal energy production, just to give a lift for a green energy development and just energy transition. DPME, again, here my colleagues, I'm also suggesting that in partnership with DPSA, you can set and monitor performance arrangements with a focus on just transition goals. Again, Cabinet has made the decision. The President, at his State of the National Address, made clear indications of how South Africa is moving in this direction, and therefore the work of directors general, particularly in departments, is to have implementation plans to achieve those goals. And DPME is the department that has the responsibility to monitor performance at our level, at the level, not at my level, at the level of principals and directors general. At the same time, the planning part of DPME has to assist with implementation frameworks that are robust. And I was thinking about the methodology of big fast results as a methodology that we should be adopting or similar methodologies, so that you have a PAGISA that focuses on just transition plans. And basically that methodology would be able to coalesce with the Presidential Commission on Climate Change, because it does require an independent review in that respect, from what we do, to have an independent eye from other partners, social partners. The National School of Government, having started this even conversation today, may be encouraged to continue to invest in learning and exchange programs in the public service as a platform for sharing science on just transition and the use of the various types of evidence to inform policy formulation, planning, implementation, and evaluation. And the non-state actors remain engaged through the PCC to enable consensus building through those diverse stakeholders. Next slide. I want to thank, next slide. I want to thank my former colleagues and DMRE, IPP office and members of the PCC that contributed inputs to help me with this, to put together the information for this presentation. And in particular, Ms. Judy Beaumont, and I'm thanking the National School of Government for the invitation and all the participants. And I will learn from your own contributions. I do not have all the answers, and certainly I may not have answered all the questions that were raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your inputs. For one, I learned a lot with your presentation, especially taking us through where we come from with all this climate change, what the South Africa has done to where we are now, where we're busy with this just energy transition. It's very informative, and I think it helps. We do have a few questions that have been posted on the Q&A. We'll get to them just now. We just want to remind everyone that is attending that there is a Mentimeter. It's got only 4 questions that you need to respond to. If you look in your chat, you can find the link there, and then you can be able to go to that link and give your inputs to the questions that have been posed there. There's just 4 questions, and it's anonymous. So with that, we're still waiting for the minister to join us. He's still struggling, but in the meantime, we'll carry on and look at taking some of those questions. We do want to allow some that have the know-how to also come in and answer some of the questions that have been posed. As we know, the ambassador used to work in the Department of Environmental Affairs before, so that's where she gets a lot of knowledge from. And she's not in that post right now, but she does have information, and we do have people in the platform that can be able to assist with some of the questions that have been posed. With that in mind, we just want to check and see some of the questions that have been posed there. One of the questions from Janet Cherry that says, is SA on track with regards to the GHG emission NDC of 398-510 by 2025? What are the current GHG emissions? Okay, the second one is from Jatesh Keshaw. You says, are we on track with the job creation? We do want to give some opportunities to some of the people that are asking questions to be part of the panelists and be able to ask them in person if they are interested, so they can indicate to our host, then they'll be given the opportunity. So maybe to start off with those first two questions. Ambassador, are you able to take any of those two? Even the Deputy Minister can be able to assist where possible.
Thank you. I think the current greenhouse gas emissions, when I presented, I had a slide that was reflecting up to 2014. So there is a report, and I can check it online, but my colleagues would have the current levels. Are we on track with the emissions reduction? I thought that's the second one, Kesha. My sense is that the plan is there to be on track, and from what I read on the end, even from the NDCs, it was indicating our national determined contributions that we tabled last year to the UNFCCC reflect that we're still ambitious and will be able to meet our commitments as South Africa. So we should be on track, but we will only evaluate because it's not evaluated every year, it gets evaluated every 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that answer. We're going to take Jatesh Shao. Your hand is up. You can ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you. All protocol observed. I think one of the takeaways from the presentation was there's a lack of focus on the key element of the just transition. And this is included in the Paris Agreement of 2015. The just transition, and the word just is put in there because it's a transition of the workforce. It's not a transition of the energy system. That is why the word just is there. So if we talk about energy transition, that's a different thing. But the moment we talk about just transition, it's enshrined in the Paris Agreement and the International Labour Organization's documents that it's about labor. And it's about transitioning the workforce from a carbon-based economy to one which is not carbon-based. And I found that completely missing from the presentation. I'm sorry to say that. It's seen as something tertiary, not even secondary. And I think we need to really engage on this as government and get our story correctly focused to what the aim of the just transition is. It's not about changing energy. The consequence of changing energy and the management of the impact of that is what gave rise to the just transition. So we need to really, really change our focus into when we talk about just transition, it's about the workforce. And people are losing jobs en masse with the transition to other energy sources now. And we are not on track in terms of retaining those jobs in the coal sector that are being lost. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your inputs. It will be interesting to hear what would you suggest as government we should be doing as well to try and save those jobs that are being lost. What else can be done? Just giving you an opportunity maybe to come back before we take the next hand at Jenna straight on, maybe just giving us some of your advice of what government should be doing. Jatesh?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing that we should do is get our policies in place in terms of just transition. So we need to be clear that when we are talking as just transition, we are talking about the jobs. We need to focus on that and we need to deal with that. Once we have that in place, there's many options to deal with the job losses and the creation of additional jobs and the reskilling of people to take on additional jobs, whether it be in the renewable sector, the nuclear space, or any other space, batteries or whatever the case might be. But there needs to be a focus to do that. And the focus needs not to focus. There's already a focus from the private sector to drive towards low energy carbon sources. But the focus on how to do this in a way that is inclusive of labor, I find that missing. So that's the first step. And there's many ways of creating these jobs by ensuring, for example, designation of manufacturing of certain components, etc. We talk about the green, green taxonomy, creating incentives for local production of green technologies, etc. So, but the focus, I think, needs to shift on, when we talk about just transition, we talk about labor. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your input. Ambassador?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that input, Kiasho. I did say, though, that there are social risks associated with the transition to loss of employment and livelihoods. And yes, I agree with you there. But in the context of energy, because I was also talking about energy in essence, because it is the main contributor to climate change or to greenhouse gas emissions. It is important that we also focus on the democratization of the energy or electricity generation in South Africa. And that, in essence, also has aspects of social value, which is associated with coal around jobs and children and families that are dependent on that sector. Similarly, the social values on renewables and green growth and green jobs, whether you're talking the agricultural sector and so on, because there are ways in which we are going to be able to provide jobs. Hence, at the end, I was also outlining the importance of reskilling and also making sure that we have job resilient plans for each of the sectors. So we talk about the just transition overall in terms of what it means in respect of social risks that are associated, but also in the context of just energy transition itself, because it's an important aspect when it relates to social justice, because social risks are not only about jobs, they are also about the public health and what the state ends up investing, because one, we are losing, people's health is exposed with some of the fossil fuels, especially with also the levels of non-compliance in respect of other emissions beyond greenhouse gas emissions. Similarly, we can look at water, the use of water and coal, and especially coal in terms of the various fossil fuels. In areas, in a country which is a water scarce country, that's a social outcome that is not desirable, and we need to confront all of those aspects. Thank you very much but I take your point. Thanks.
Thank you. We're gonna take, I'm gonna read one more question, then we're gonna, while you think about that one, we'll take another person to ask that question live. So the question was from Janet Cherry, who says, what is current government thinking about green hydrogen and nuclear combined with PV solar could be pathway to zero fossil fuels? So one of the questions to answer, but let's take a question as well from Adrian Stradon. Adrian, you can switch on your video and unmute.
I'm unfortunately not able to switch on my video, but just to say that it is important that we develop a dynamic, shared, and a phased approach to the energy transition. It's important that as industry, government, communities, we work together to develop energy sustainability. In South Africa, we have to remember our people, jobs, as was said earlier. We have to bear in mind that energy transition by implication is not going to happen overnight. So we're going to have to develop a fact-based, phased approach so that we prepare ourselves adequately for the future, and that we work together as industry, government, and, you know, take the sting of, say, the gas industry versus renewables, there shouldn't be one against the other, but there should be a combined planning and thinking, so that I see, for example, gas as a very important source of energy in the transition period and probably beyond as well. So we cannot downplay the role of gas in the transition, and we need to plan for both imports of gas and local exploration initiatives. We're going to have to find ways to continue to sustain industrial development at the same time as reaching for the goals of net zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian Stratton, for your comments. I'm taking them, they were not a question, they were comment and talking to the fact that we should not be comparing, try and work everything together, because all of these sources of energy are all important and will help us to get to the future that we want, while still making sure that there's sustainability and we still are able to make sure our economy functions well. Janet Sherry, can we allow you to ask your questions or comments?
Yeah, good morning. And thank you very much, Ambassador, for a really quite dense and comprehensive input. I found it very useful. I'm a bit concerned about this issue that Adrian was raising, which is about the energy mix and, you know, what energy mix is going to be optimum for our development, etc. I mean, there really are hard questions. They're hard questions that have to be asked and answered in this regard. So he raised the question of gas. So why I raised the question of are we on target? We're between now 2020 and 2025, exactly halfway through. Okay, so we had a certain nationally determined contribution target to meet, and we don't know whether we are on track to meet that target. So what I would be putting forward is what are the decisions to be made in terms of where we should be putting our energy. So I asked the question about green hydrogen, which involves different technology and a different group of metals, which can be mined using renewable energy and can be completely free of carbon emissions. Nuclear power, where we're not sure where the government is at the moment in terms of nuclear power, which is also completely free of carbon, well, not completely, but mainly free of carbon emissions. And PV solar, which is a tested technology which can be used in a very distributed way in many, many households and businesses. So I would argue that those three could obviate the need for any new fossil fuel exploitation. But we've got a government policy which is quite contradictory or unclear in this regard, because there's a very strong push to use gas. We've had the whole debate about offshore gas and oil exploitation. We've had the whole debate about shale gas exploitation in the Karoo, both of which are very controversial. And it's really just not clear what the emphasis is. And one way to answer that would be to say, let's rather put our energy into alternative and new technologies and existing technologies, which we know are going to contribute to our lowering our carbon emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions. Anyway, I would like a response to this in terms of, specifically in terms of the debate about gas. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to take two more hands, then we'll give the ambassador a chance to respond. Let's get the hand of Muzweni Ngoma.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't actually see where to turn on my camera. Says, okay, stairs. Can you hear me? Am I audible, colleagues?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thanks very much. About a month ago, the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection released its book on the transition to a low carbon economy. And one of the central findings in that book is that for the structural reform to take place within the energy sector, there is a necessity to develop very strategic kind of like policies and strategies. Now, the ambassador in one of her statements and in the presentation stated that South Africa had begun thinking about a just energy transition from about 1998, right? And that a couple of decisions and thinking was just really taking place at that time, but not all of those decisions and the necessary momentum was actually carried through. Now, in our current stance, it is absolutely imperative, and there's no more time to achieve, a just energy transition. And I'm wondering now, what the current capacity from a cultural perspective or an organizational perspective, what can the state do immediately, in the ambassador's words, to really deliver big, fast results in this area? And really, what are the kind of like cultural blockages within these institutions that are supposed to take this work forward? And how can we then address that? Because I think implicit in the presentation is that South Africa knows what to do. South Africa has responded in some respects programmatically and from a policy area, but we have not necessarily gained the necessary kind of traction and momentum that is the structural reform in the energy sector really does demand. So I'm curious about how we think about ourselves as a state at work and what it is that we can do to really push, gain momentum, and speedily and effectively, deliver on the imperatives of a just energy transition. Yes.
Thank you for your question. I'm gonna check. I should have the next hand of Uyile Kabaduya. Uyile, are you still on the platform?
Hello, Chair?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, thanks, Chair.
Can switch on the video.
Must I switch on the video?
Yes, please.
Yes, Chair. Am I audible now?
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, Chair. Thank you very much. No, Chair, thanks for the presentation from the ambassador, and thanks for this opportunity for this very critical discussion in our country. We need to, before I ask the question from the ambassador, I want us to be wary as the country to polarize this discussion, which is very critical, because it has got implication on our economic growth and the ability of our energy system to be able to fuel the economy that we want to achieve as the country. We have seen this just energy debate being degenerated and polarized, such that government find it very difficult to have a coordinated approach to achieve, one, reduced carbon emissions, two, a balanced energy system, and a stable grid that will be able to industrialize the economy of the country. Of course, taking into consideration the resources that the country have, and what can science do to make sure that we utilize the resources that we have, to make sure that we maximize on all the resources. I'm raising this, Chair, because one of the resources that people tend to overlook are now taking up, such as your coal. Everyone is looking for coal after what happened in in Russia and Ukraine. Our coal is being demanded everywhere, even the UK, that has been on us to actually sterilize our coal and not use it. I'm saying these things, the chairperson, because we happen to be a country that is reactive and told what to do and not have a locally based solutions to our economic problems. And that is always going to be a challenge for us. As we speak, we are concerned, of course, about carbon border. But after what happened between Ukraine and Russia, a carbon border is not concerned, particularly for the world, for the globe, for the developed world, because they saw how vulnerable they are because they dependent on the other country for their energy systems. Now, if we are to develop a just transition that will solely depend on someone else on its energy system, is going to be a challenge. Because what happened in Ukraine and Russia demonstrated the importance of having energy sovereignty and energy independence. Now, if you are not going to use resources that you have, be it gas, wind, solar, and coal, then you are going to be in trouble as the country. Now, for a country that is developmental in character, should be able to use science to solve its problem. If science demonstrates that carbon capture and storage is a viable solution, for instance, the General Electric have demonstrated, and they said they have the technology they can deploy to South Africa at any time. So if you don't use science to solve your problems and you shy away from a metal or from a mineral that benefit your revenue, what kind of government is that? What are you talking about here? Do we want solutions that are going to help our people, that are going to create jobs for our people, or we are just want to be relevant, even at the expense of our economic growth? So what I'm trying to say to Ambassador, what I have views, particularly now that the global economies are struggling with high energy prices, and what I have views on the energy sovereignty of the country. And is our transition being handled properly in South Africa? And if no, what can we do to make sure that this is coordinated properly? Because as things stand, it's not coordinated properly. Some of the engineers are left behind. People who understand how do we make sure that the system is balanced and the system is able to respond to the economic challenges. We have a load shedding today, but engineers, they've warned us a long time ago to say, this is what we must do, and we didn't listen. We listened more to lobbyists who does not even understand about energy system, by the way. So I think we need to bring everyone on board. Let's not get carried away. Let's try to have all relevant South Africans to the topic to discuss, and then we will be then able to have an energy system that is going to grow our economy. If we take the developed countries, particularly your BRICS countries, if you take China now, they are building new coal power stations. They are even leading in the green energy technology, by the way, in the green energy revolution. So why can't we then follow working models for developing countries? Increase the green technologies, but also don't sterilize your technologies that you have. Use technologies that seeks to project to the world that you are reducing your emissions.
Thank you.
Lastly,
sorry, we're just running out of time. We still have 2 more hands. I think we've got your point, and the ambassador will respond to. Let's take the hand of Craig Mokel, followed by Vuyela Sieka.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can switch on your video as well.
Chair, I'm not dressed for video today. I don't have any makeup on, so please forgive me. Chair, if I may go ahead with the question, the debate seems to be at a point where one could almost call it a stalemate at present because of subjectivity and emotion that has crept into the debate. There needs to be a refocus on a methodology that would be a lot more objective and remove much of the emotion that has resulted in some technologies being promoted above others. Whether they be conventional fossil fuel-based technologies versus renewable energy technologies should be irrelevant if a correct methodology is developed to balance various imperatives. Now, we are signatories to the Paris Accord. We have tabled our nationally determined commitments. There is no doubt about the commitments from our government in multilateral fora such as the United Nations and elsewhere. The question that we need to ask ourselves is where the challenge really is for South Africa. And if one looks at our imperatives, we need to start basically with our constitution. Our constitution in section 24 defines what sustainable development is and seeks to harmonize the imperatives of environment and development. It doesn't say one or the other. It says balance. It intends to harmonize. Now, these are not only environment versus development debates, it is also linked to our understanding and commitments to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which one can then categorize into the 5 Ps as imperatives: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. And the debate seems to be around technology choices that seems to ignore some of the imperatives over the other. And because this is a masterclass on governance, we need to ask ourselves, what methodology are we applying at a master planning level in government to determine a future energy mix, whether it take the form of an integrated energy plan or an integrated resource plan for electricity? Are we putting either of our imperatives, planet, people, prosperity, peace, and partnership, over the other? And so my question then to Ambassador is, from her perspective, what should government be doing better in terms of master planning that could harmonize these imperatives instead of this subjective, emotive debate which seeks to promote one technology or few technologies over the other? Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. We'll take the last hand from Fuyelwa Siega, then we'll hand over to the Ambassador.
Morning, Chair. Apologies, it's not Fuyelwa, it's Ntokozo. My name is Ntokozo, everyone. Morning. My name is Ntokozo. I'm the DDG responsible for policy in the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. I just want to touch on a few points before Ambassador responds to the questions. But the points I'm going to touch on, I know, do sort of respond to some of the questions that have been raised. So the approach for the department, and I know this is the approach with the Commission as well, is that we have undertaken a critical analysis of where we are as a country, but also we've taken time to look at where do we want to go as a country, given our commitment to the Paris Agreement, because as a country, I do wish to state this, we are committed to the just transition, not just energy transition, but the broader transition. And so we marry that with our mission as the department, which is to ensure energy of security supply in the country. And so our position is that we need to take an approach that is systematic and phased in. The IRP, which Ambassador referred to in her presentation, really does set the tone for the South African journey towards a low carbon energy system. And that is the starting point for us as the department. Now, I'll quickly touch on, given the time pressure, on the question around oil and gas that was raised. If you look at Operation Pakisa and the resolutions that were taken in 2014, under the Oil and Gas Delivery Unit, there was a commitment by both government and private sector that we will drill 9 wells to explore for oil and gas in South Africa. And we are there now as a country, and we believe we are on the right track. There is space for oil and gas still in our energy system. And this is also highlighted clearly in the IRP. I mean, the IRP clearly makes provision for 3,000 megawatts of gas by 2027. But looking at where we are, we might even have first gas delivered before 2027. But I think also on the international stage, in the light of our international commitments as a country, it's also worth noting that the IEA and COP26 for that matter they do recognize gas as a transition fuel. So we believe gas does have an important role to play in our economy. And lastly, 2 policy instruments that we are currently working on as the department is the gas utilization master plan, which we did publish for comments in December. We are busy consolidating reports, and then we will again continue to engage stakeholders before we finalize that, as well as the gas framework for the South African economy. So that's where we are on the policy front, and all these are done. And lastly, the Just Energy Transition Framework that was also gazetted late last year and taken on a round of consultations around February and March. But we will continue to engage our stakeholders on those. So I thought I would mention those before Ambassador responds to the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ntokozo. Ambassador?
Sorry, DDG, sorry, before the ambassador, there is also the other DDG from DMRE, Zizamele Mbambo, responsible for nuclear. Maybe let's give him the opportunity as well before the ambassador.
Okay. Can take the floor.
Mbambo, are you still there?
Can you kindly unmute? You're on the floor. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, a good day to the ambassador and the panel. And thank you very much for this very important discussion on the just energy transition. I think I just want to comment in as far as the role of nuclear is concerned. Nuclear is now globally recognized as part of the green energy solution. There is a report by the Energy Agency that has found that without nuclear, the goals of a just energy transition would not be achieved. And it recommended that there is a need to increase the deployment of nuclear power to the extent of 17 gigawatts per annum that will be required if we are to achieve the goals to reduce the carbon emissions. In that respect, even here in South Africa, the government has recognized that nuclear will play a central role as part of clean energy technologies towards a just energy transition. In 2008, government approved the Nuclear Energy policy for South Africa, which indicates that nuclear shall form part of the government strategy to reduce the carbon footprint. I think what then becomes important is that given that there is a policy for South Africa in that regard, and also the integrated resource plan recognize the role of nuclear as part of the clean energy technologies that will be required to take us through the just energy transition. What becomes critical is that in South Africa, as part of a just energy transition discussion, we need to mainstream nuclear. We need to recognize and amplify the role that nuclear plays globally and it plays in South Africa. We need to incorporate the existing policy directives around the role of nuclear as part of the government strategy to reduce the carbon footprint and incorporate into the discussions that are taking place at the national level about how are we going to transition towards clean energy technologies and recognize that nuclear already is a solution that the government has. We have Kuwait nuclear power plant that has generated clean energy for more than 30 years, and it contributes quite significantly, about 5% of electricity into the national grid. So one of the callers then mentioned nuclear, but indicated that they're not sure where government is in regards to the nuclear. Government takes nuclear as part of the central energy mix that would take the country into the just energy transition. In preparation towards the deployment of the 2,500 megawatts of nuclear that is in the integrated resource plan, NERSA has granted conditional concurrence with a ministerial determination for the procurement of the 2,500 megawatts of nuclear. However, that came up with suspensive conditions, which the department is currently engaged in resolving those suspensive conditions before it embark on the issuing of the request for proposal of the 2,500 megawatts of nuclear. So in a nutshell, nuclear still plays a central role as part of the government energy mix, and we are planning to execute nuclear to contribute towards a just energy transition. And we see nuclear globally playing a significant role. And even in South Africa, we see that nuclear will play a significant role because it provides clean baseload electricity as we transition towards the cleaner energy technologies. Thank you. I'd like to stop there.
Thank you for your input. Thank you, DDG. We're going to hand over now to Ambassador. We apologize for being late with time, but I think we do need to complete this very topical issue. Ambassador?
Thank you, DDG. Thanks again for the comments and inputs. As I said, I was supposed to be the respondent, but I am in general fine with most of the comments. Janet, I think thank you for your comment because yes, I mean the key is what is optimal in the energy mix, and the DDG from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy has outlined, as I showed in the slide regarding the IRP, that the energy mix covers all these other sources. But of course, at implementation, the question is which one is at implementation, which one is coming on stream, and what it contributes currently and what it will contribute in the future beyond the period of 2025 and even 2030. So I think, firstly, I think from what I understand, the government of South Africa is looking at green hydrogen, and it's one source that is also clean, of course, subject to what you use it in combination. If you use clean energy to break down the molecule of water, then to get hydrogen, then it will be clean and green on that basis. So that's something that I think I'm mentioning, but again, it's the department that are leading this work area. From what I've seen in the statements on government, green hydrogen is definitely an option that's being considered. The question is whether we are moving fast enough, because other countries are also moving at scale. And I'm aware, for example, Egypt, they published an arrangement currently with the Italian government on green hydrogen. So it's going to be interesting who gets into that space earlier than others, because it is going to be competitive as alternative future energy source. And the other comment I wanted to make is that, I mean, gas, as I also indicated, is part of the RP, and again, as also reflected by the DDG, it is a transition fuel, and it is already being used in South Africa and by ESCOM as part of the energy mix with coal, together with coal and nuclear. So, and it offers certain flexibilities, but it is still a fossil fuel. It's not as clean as other green technologies. So that's then the question is, what is it going to contribute beyond the transition period? And that's what science must monitor and colleagues advise in terms of decision making. Amazweni's comment, I think key, I think the report on Mapungubwe is correct to state the importance of the structural reform in terms of the energy and what would necessitate that reform, and part of which includes the consideration on other minerals. I had shown a slide which had coal, palladium, and others on the right side of the quadrant, which can be deemed to be the strategic minerals of the future, which are crucial for energy storage and other solutions in respect of transitions into the future. So in that complex, I had shown iron ore on the right, platinum, copper, which would contribute strategic minerals. Again, as to whether there is actually a policy or a paper that deals with how that would unfold, it's a matter that the Department of Mineral Resources can reflect on. But it would also achieve both a reduction in terms of positioning those mineral complexes. It would assist in achieving the transition and reduction of carbon intensity of the mining sector, and still meet our export requirements. So that's what seems to be the evidence that's available in terms of the science. Avuyile, I think in principle, I also agree with you, because I mean, the key thing is, when you talk about any transition and change, the first question is, what problem are you solving? And what do we need? And what do we have as a country? As a country, we're clear about our socio-economic situation. And all those objectives are what we look at, those are the objectives that are informing the whole discourse on just transition. And therefore, we always have to bear in mind that our goals would also be informed by what science is available and what funds and who has got what money. Unfortunately, in South Africa currently, we can look at all of those options that are in the IRP. They are also going to depend on who is going to invest in them and our ability to leverage investments. And unfortunately, in the area of fossil fuels, international finances are not going to be available as easily as they used to. I'm not saying that they are not available now, but I'm just saying that the future from what the international, from both the international platforms, the G20 that took place here in Italy last year, took as part of the G20 summit leaders outcome, has indicated a stop on financing for fossil fuels and investments in terms of international flows. I guess if you have the fossil fuels and you have the resources, you probably can still do that, but you will also do it against your other plans in terms of your targets that you put in place. So the Ukraine issue and situation has created instability in terms of energy security globally, especially those countries that depend on Russia or Ukraine for gas and so on. And a part of the scramble has been how those countries are going to, what options they have. So I've seen more of the gas outcomes, and I'll talk about Italy because I have an understanding of the economic data of Italy. Italy imports about 40% of its gas from Russia, and the balance from Algeria and other countries. And recently they've had engagements with Algeria to look at options to expand and Egypt as well as Angola and other countries. So there is a trend that countries want to secure themselves, and yes, South Africa must look at what it means to secure ourselves, which is why we talk about a transition, and that transition has to balance the kind of benefits and outcomes that we are looking for, and including how we're going to invest in new solutions that relate to development of those minerals, if we are to develop all the minerals that we have as a country. And then the next, and so there are technical aspects, economic aspects, and social aspects, and we always have to look at how we balance them. And we are not driven as a country, from what I know, we've always been driven by evidence and as well as our own interests and how those decisions that are taken on global platforms would impact us. And in this case, climate change is impacting South Africa. Whether we do nothing or we do something, we are going to be impacted. Craig, your comment about the stalemate, I suspect the debate, it's in the nature of the debates that we can be emotional and subjective, but I think what I can confirm with you about the methodology, you were asking what would be the correct methodology. As I said, problem statement, South Africa has got to a plan to respond to climate change, and it entails that we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. The key questions are the hows. How do you do it, at what pace, and with what resources? And that's more of what the methodology includes. So no doubt the imperatives are grounded on the SDGs, people, planet, prosperity, and all of the other matters that really matter for the country. So this is why there is a debate and there is a discourse. It's because aspects of the how involve certain choices that must be made. And the key question is, how do we make those choices in an objective fashion? And that's what is is probably debatable. DDG Ntokozo, thank you for the contribution. Again, I think your comment was making additions and you've outlined, but what you did not help me with is where we are with our greenhouse gas emissions, where do we stand currently? But I think that information can be posted for the person that was asking it, or if I were to get the contact, I will send it later on. I don't have the information right with me now. The IRP, you confirming what it entails, and that it includes gas, and how that is envisaged by the department. Nuclear, the input on nuclear also, I think, is confirming what's covered in the approved IRP by Cabinet as published. It does include a contribution by nuclear, and we have nuclear in the current energy mix. And the key issue in nuclear, confirming also on science, is clean in terms of greenhouse gas. It doesn't contribute greenhouse gas emissions, so it's clean from that point of view. However, it does have a problem of nuclear waste, and it also has serious costs in terms of affordability, which is why I understand there's been a delay with the implementation and progress in respect of investment on nuclear program, but it is part of what is covered in the IRP. So the department would can provide more information about the actual plan on how the implementation plan is going to unfold in terms of a future nuclear build program. From that point of view, I have no further comments, and I think I want to thank all the colleagues that participated, because yeah, I don't represent anybody except that I was asked to give some talk on the matter on the basis of the information that was available to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We put you on a hot seat without the minister. Unfortunately, you could not join us, but we are grateful that you were able to respond to most of the questions that were posed here. We appreciate your time with us here, and everyone that has participated. I'm gonna take the closing remarks from our principal, Usani Ngabweni, and he will also do some advertisement of our next masterclass. We hope everyone that's on this platform will join us again. Principal.
Thank you, DDG. Thank you, Ambassador. We value your last 2 hours here with us and everybody who has attended and all the colleagues who are participating. We will continue to open spaces for colleagues to engage on major public policy matters like these ones. As I indicated, the National School of Government has a new course on the just transition. It will be opening up in the next few weeks. So please do enroll for this course, colleagues in the public sector. So everyone is eligible for it. If you are in the public sector or any form of a public entity, including councillors and MPs and MPLs are eligible to join this course. We've got another masterclass with the director of London School of Economics and a former governor of the Bank of or the Reserve Bank of England, which will be on the social compact at the end of May. So we hope to see you there. Otherwise, we are grateful to the Deputy Minister who attended this program today, the Ambassador and everybody else. Let's all go back to class in order to learn, serve and grow. Thank you very much and have a good long weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Principal.
Thanks, Ambassador. Thank you.
Okay,
yeah, I think the problem is that there is no justice in the distribution of network capabilities. That is why he is unable to to be here. At some point he did join, but also went off as well. But I'll share his presentation with you.
Okay, sure.
Very nice, principal.
Thank you so much.